Hi, Year 4. I hope you're enjoying the sunshine today. It's been glorious. I'm back on to read you the next chapter of The Name of This Book is Secret. We're on chapter 7 and it's called A Striking Couple. For about a second and a half, Cass stood frozen. Then she ran. When she reached the bathroom, the door was opening and a scrawny old cat darted out. It was the cat, Cass realised with relief, who was the source of that second scream. Max Ernest was standing by the toilet, panting and pointing. Next to him, the wall had opened up, revealing a large, hidden room. "It just happened when I flushed," he said. "There was some kind of hidden door." Determined not to let herself be scared by another cat or any other pet, Cass boldly stepped into the opening. Max Ernest followed cautiously. The hidden room was dominated by a big wooden desk and was crammed top to bottom with the magician's things. "His workroom," said Cass, who was instantly reminded of her grandfather's antique store and therefore very comfortable. "I guess Gloria doesn't know about it. That's why there's still so much stuff. There's got to be something for us in here." Max Ernest, who was still not recovered from the shock, pointed to the empty bowl of cat food and not so empty litter box. "You think that cat's been in here since the magician died?" Cass nodded. "OK, you start at one end, I'll start at the other." "So then you have to admit, I was right, there was a secret room. How about that?" Cass didn't answer. She just started combing through the boxes. "It stinks," Max Ernest grumbled. But he started looking around all the same. They were half amazed and half disappointed by what they found. There were none of the objects you would usually see in a magician's workroom. No magic wands, no boxes for sawing women in half, no top hats for hiding rabbits, no bits of trickery or fakery of any kind. Instead, there were kinds of things you see more often in a study of a mad professor. There was a broken brass scale and an enormous magnifying glass covered with dust. There was a microscope holding an empty slide, a telescope pointed at a spot on the ceiling, and even a stethoscope draped over the desk chair. There was a taxidermy ferret, a collection of rocks and crystals, all of which had some kind of incandescent luminescent or opalescent quality, and hundreds of butterflies pinned to cardboard with their wings frozen in a last attempt at flight. And there were books and papers everywhere. But there was nothing magical, or sulphurous, or in any way lethal. Sebastian, meanwhile, was sniffing around a drawer underneath the magician's desk. Following his lead, Cass opened the drawer and pulled out a large leather-bound notebook. "What's that?" asked Max Ernest. Cass put her finger to her lips. Sebastian had moved away from her desk towards the outside wall and was twitching nervously. A sure sign of danger. The sound of the elevator moving echoed through the house. Max Ernest opened his mouth to say something, but Cass immediately clamped her hand over his mouth and held tight. He looked furious, but he couldn't remove her hand no matter how hard he tried. She was too strong. Then they heard the elevator door open and a voice, unmistakably Gloria's, ring out from it. She was so loud and shrill they could hear every word. "Newlyweds, you say? How wonderful! You make such a striking couple. You know, I do have some above-ground homes to show that might be more to your taste. Oh, you've always wanted an underground house? Marvellous!" Cass pointed with her free hand to a small grate that looked out into the corner of the living room where Sebastian had been growling earlier. It must have been the cat that made him growl. She and Max Ernest watched through the grate as Gloria stepped out of the elevator and walked towards them. Thankfully, Sebastian remained quiet. It was as though he knew they didn't want to be found. "You know, I had a feeling about this house," Gloria continued, "that the right couple would just fall in love with it. So romantic, isn't it, Dr. L," said a deep voice with one of those elusive accents you can't quite identify no matter how hard you try. "Oh, L what?" asked Gloria. "Just L," he responded, to the smug tone of someone who's just won an argument. "I see," said Gloria, who clearly did not see at all. "And that makes you Mrs.?" "It's Miss Morvay," answered a woman. Evidently, Miss Marvey, her voice tinkling in a way that should have sounded light and musical, but instead sounded icy and unpleasant. "Oh, so you didn't take your husband's name? Or rather, I mean his initial?" "Apparently not," said Mrs. Marvey, as she and Dr. L finally came into view, towering above the short estate agent. Cass pressed her face against the grate to get a better look at these newlywed house hunters. Gloria was not exaggerating when she said they made a striking couple. Dr. L was tall and tanned and had the whitest teeth Cass had ever seen. He wore a grey suit with a silver tie, and he had a silver hair that looked like it had been blowing in the wind. And yet his hair never moved. Despite the colour of his hair, he didn't have any wrinkles on his face. He was so handsome that he seemed far away, even when he was close. If anything, Miss Marvey was even more dazzling, and not just because she was dripping with gold jewellery. She was almost as tall as Dr. L, and she had a teeny tiny waist. She had blonde Barbie hair that swooped up from her forehead, forming a perfect golden helmet, not a strand out of place. She had blue Barbie eyes that were big and round and sparkling and never seemed to blink. Her skin, too, was smooth and flawless like a doll's. No part of her face ever moved, even when she spoke. It was as if she and Dr. L had taken photographs of themselves at just the perfect moments when they looked their absolute best, and then they'd have cast a spell so that they would look like their photographs forever. One thing was strange about them. They both wore gloves on their hands, even though the day was really warm. They were terrifying, at least to Cass. Max Ernest, on the other hand, was transfixed. "That's the prettiest woman I've ever seen," he whispered, when Cass finally released her hand. "Are you crazy?" Cass whispered back. "She looks like a zombie. They both do." Miss Marvey was looking towards them, something like a quizzical expression on her face. For a second they thought she heard them, but perhaps this was how they always looked. Then she turned back towards Gloria. "I see you've cleared out all of the previous occupants' belongings," said Mrs. Marvey. "A magician, did you say he was?" "Yes. Well, no, I don't think I mentioned it. Or rather, I must have," Gloria laughed. "How else could you know?" "How else indeed," said Miss Marvey, while surreptitiously eyeing Dr. L. "He must have had many interesting things. Could you tell much about the magician from his belongings?" "Oh no," said Gloria. "It was just a lot of junk. Wouldn't you like to see the other rooms?" "So where is this junk now?" Miss Marvey persisted, ignoring Gloria's suggestion. "Oh, I gave it all away." "I see. And whom did you give it to?" continued Miss Marvey, as casually as if she were asking about the weather. When she heard this last question, Cass found herself shaking her head. No, silently willing Gloria not to answer. For some reason, maybe it was the way Sebastian was reacting to them, or it was just the sound of their voices, she didn't think Dr. L and Miss Marvey were really house hunting. She wasn't even sure they were newlyweds at all. What she was sure of was that she didn't want them ever to go anywhere near her grandfather's antique store. "Oh, I can't remember. I think I threw it all away," said Gloria, perhaps thinking the same thing. Cass breathed a sigh of relief. Dr. L took a step towards Gloria. "So, this magician of yours, he didn't leave any papers or files that would tell us something about him?" Gloria shook her head nervously and took a step backwards. No, nothing like that." Dr. L looked piercingly at her, like a prosecutor interrogating a witness. "A leather notebook, perhaps? Think hard." When Max Ernest heard this, he coughed and flung back his head, knocking over a pile of books. It's hard to say what happened in the commotion that followed. This much Cass would remember later. When she and Max Ernest and Sebastian exited the bathroom, she looked directly at Dr. L and Miss Marvey, and she said, "I think the notebook you're looking for is in there." As the two stunned grown-ups scrambled into the bathroom, Cass shut the door on them and headed towards the elevator. Gloria stared at them in surprise. "What are you kids doing in here?" she asked sharply. "You're trespassing. This is private property. Hey, I know you," she added, looking at Cass. "You're that pesky little girl from Larry and Wayne's." Run! Shouted Cass, pushing Sebastian towards the open elevator. Come back here right now, shouted Gloria. And what's that in your hand? Up, Cass said, as soon as they were inside the elevator. Nothing happened. Please! The elevator started to move. Stop! Thief! Shouted Gloria, waddling up the elevator, but she was too late. As for Dr. L and Ms. Morvay, they managed to get out of the magician's study just in time to see the elevator doors closing on Cass and Max Ernest, and to see Cass clutching the magician's notebook tight in her hand. Oh, I wonder if they're going to get away with it. Now, Chapter 8, which I will read tomorrow, it doesn't actually have a proper chapter name. It says, the title of this chapter is so alarming, I've decided not to include it.